The most useful piece of learning for the uses of life is to unlearn what is untrue. Antisthenes. Emerson said, "No man thoroughly understands a truth until he has contended against it. Having the answer isn't enough. You have to do the math." Arthur tells me he wants a technique. Rather, he wants the technique. I really only have one technique, and everybody who comes to the house soon learns what it is from other students. But, oddly, nobody seems to practice it until they receive it from me. I've laid it out many times and tried to put it in the public domain for the use of whoever wants it, but it has remained strangely proprietary, as if the only way it can work is if it comes directly from me. There's really not much to it, but I guess there's not much to closing your eyes and repeating a mantra or counting your breaths either. "Okay, Arthur," I begin. "The technique is called Spiritual Autolysis. Autolysis means self-digestion, and spiritual means, hell, I don't really know. Let's say it means that level of self which encompasses the mental, physical, and emotional aspects. Put the two words together, and you have a process through which you feed yourself, one piece at a time, into the purifying digestive fires." "May I ask a question?" Arthur asks. "Yes, Arthur." "You make spiritual autolysis sound rather unpleasant." "Yes, Arthur. It's an unpleasant process." "Oh, I see. Thank you." "You're welcome. The process of spiritual autolysis is basically like a Zen koan on steroids. All you really have to do is write the truth." "Write the truth?" Sounds simple, doesn't it? Yes, that's all there is to it. Just write down what you know is true, or what you think is true, and keep writing until you've come up with something that is true. "There are 360 degrees in a circle," says Arthur. "Sure," I agree. "Start with something as seemingly indisputable as that, and then start examining the foundation upon which that statement is built, and just keep following it down until you've reached bedrock, something solid, true." "There aren't 360 degrees in a circle?" he asks. The question presupposes that there's a circle. "There's not a circle?" "Maybe. I don't know. Is there?" "Well, if I draw a circle..." "I? When did you confirm the existence of an I? Draw? Have you already raced past the part where you confirmed that you are a separate physical being in a physical universe with the ability to perceive, to draw? Have you already confirmed duality as truth?" Arthur is thoughtful and silent for several moments. "I guess that's what you mean by following it down. This is very confusing. I don't even know where to start." "It doesn't matter where you start. You could start by using Ramana Maharishi's query, 'Who am I?' or 'What is me?' and then just work at it. Just try to say something true and keep at it until you do. Write and rewrite. Make it cleaner and cut out the excess and ego and follow it wherever it leads until you're done." "And how long does that usually take?" "I would think a couple of years. But when you're done, you're done." "And by done you mean..." "Done." "Oh, is this like journaling? Like keeping a diary?" "Ah, good question. No. This isn't about personal awareness or self-exploration. It's not about feelings or insights. It's not about personal or spiritual evolution. This is about what you know for sure, about what you are sure you know is true, about what you are that is true." With this process, you tear away layer after layer of untruth masquerading as truth. Anytime you go back to read something you wrote, even if it was only yesterday, you should be surprised by how far you've come since then. It's actually a painful and vicious process, somewhat akin to self-mutilation. It creates wounds that will never heal, and burns bridges that can never be rebuilt. And the only real reason to do it is because you can no longer stand not to. He lets that sink in for a few moments. What's the reason for writing it down? Why not just do it in your head like with koans? That's another good question. Yes, koans and mantras are done in your head. Ramana Maharishi's "Who am I?" query is done in your head. The reason for writing it down on paper or on a computer where you can see it is because the brain, unlikely as it may sound, is no place for serious thinking. Any time you have serious thinking to do, the first step is to get the whole shooting match out of your head and set it up someplace where you can walk around it and see it from all sides. Attack, switch sides, and counterattack. You can't do that while it's still in your head. Writing it out allows you to act as your own teacher, your own critic, your own opponent. By externalizing your thoughts, you can become your own guru, judging yourself, giving feedback, providing a more objective and elevated perspective. Arthur is looking at me questioningly, so I continue. You're an engineer, right? Yes. And you engineer what? Bridges. In your head? Arthur pauses a moment to consider. Yes and no, he says. Okay, you're saying yes because there's a process of conceptualization, right? The idea stage? There is, yes. And other internal creative and problem-solving stages along the way? Yes. And then what? What's after the initial conceptualization? Well, then there are the meetings and preliminary drawings and more meetings and the project managers. The creative process at work. Well, yes. So basically, it starts as an idea, a thought in someone's head, and ends up as a real bridge somewhere in the real world. Yes. And along the way it evolves, takes shape, comes into focus, right? It moves from idea to rough sketches to highly precise drawings and scale models to an actual bridge that will last 100 years. Something like that? Something like that, yes. And that's the creative process. Thought to reality. It's always the same process, whether it's a bridge, a poem, the space shuttle, or your life. Does that make sense? Okay, yes. You recognize that from your own life, your own work? Yes, I do. Could that all happen in someone's head? One person's head? Arthur laughs. Certainly not. No. Thought, whether in the brain or out, is a creative tool, and spiritual autolysis is a creative process, just like any other, just like building a bridge. But bridge builders are very educated men, Arthur points out. It's both an art and a science, and it can take a lifetime to fully develop. Creative endeavor is erected on a foundation of knowledge and experience. Absolutely, I reply, and I can assure you that while you're in this process of self-digestion, you're going to develop a voracious appetite for all sorts of knowledge, religious, esoteric, metaphysical, spiritual, New Age, Eastern, and Western philosophy, all that and more. You'll be relying on the knowledge and experience of men and women from throughout history without regard to race or nationality, but your search will take you far beyond human intelligence. Truth transcends time and boundaries, and so will your search for it. You'll definitely want a good library or used bookstore nearby. Does that make spiritual autolysis a path of intellect as opposed to a path of heart, or a path of devotion, or a path of service? Ugh. Frankly, you start losing me a little bit there, Arthur. He gives me a perplexed look. I don't know what all these different paths are, Arthur. Spiritual autolysis is an intellectual endeavor, but I balk at calling it a path of intellect. It's a process of discrimination, of unknowing what is untrue, of progressively stripping away the false and leaving only what is true. Discrimination is used in a machete-like manner for hacking one's way through the dense underbrush of delusion, or, if you prefer, in a sword-like manner for hacking off one's own delusion-riddled head. Intellect is used as the sword with which ego commits a slow and agonizing suicide, the death of 1,000 cuts. Whether that makes it this kind of path or that kind of path doesn't concern us here. That's something for a student of paths to worry about. If the question stays with you, then it's something you can address for yourself in the process of spiritual autolysis. I used to be pretty well versed in spiritual literature, and I recall that there's a lot of talk about different paths. But from where I sit, it's just another way of distracting yourself from the difficult work of breaking free. No theory of paths is of any practical value in waking up. The very idea that there is a set path, much less a choice of paths, that one need merely follow is ruinously misleading. In short, this path business is just another case of the blind leading the blind, part of the vast mythology created by caterpillars teaching caterpillars how to become butterflies. Arthur interrupts my thoughts. I read that Don Juan said... Whoa, I jump in. Hold up a sec. Is this going to be the path with heart thing? Yes. I'm familiar with the Carlos Castaneda book in which Don Juan advises Carlito to choose a path with heart. I am familiar with it for the same reason that so many spiritual seekers are familiar with it, because it has that ring of sagely goodness that makes it the one thing out of all of Castaneda's writings that gets widely remembered. Does that make it true or valuable? Obviously not. Just another cliché. Just another piece of pretty misdirection. I am well aware that a great many of the world's most popular spiritual doctrines advocate a heart-centered approach to spiritual development. But popularity among the soundly asleep may not be the best criterion by which to judge a method for waking up. Let me state it plainly, Arthur. I don't do heart. To the extent that I advocate any path, it is a path without heart, devoid of compassion, totally free of any thought for others whatsoever. The thinking is simple. Wake up first. Wake up, and then you can double back and perhaps be of some use to others if you still have the urge. Wake up first with pure and unapologetic selfishness, or you're just another shipwrecked victim floundering in the ocean, and all the compassion in the world is of absolutely no use to the other victims floundering around you. Resolve your own situation first, and then maybe your compassion will translate into something of value to others. I suppose that sounds cruel or unspiritual or whatever, but it only works the way it works. Make sense? Arthur nods thoughtfully. Hey, you've probably visited those foundries where they pour the molten steel that goes into those bridges of yours, right? Certainly. Many times. Man, those places are scary looking. They make hell look like Aspen. You reckon there's a lot of different ways they could do that work, and they choose the one with heart? Arthur chuckles. Hardly. Of course not, because it works the way it works. This waking up thing isn't all sweetness and light. It's a serious business with a failure rate that's nearly absolute. Think about that. You're embarking on an undertaking that millions upon millions of sincere, intelligent men and women have committed their lives to without success. That's a pretty sobering statement. This is a process, and it works the way it works, or it doesn't work at all. You can't dictate terms. Preferences are irrelevant. It sounds like you're saying I may not even want to think of helping others once I, myself, am liberated. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how you're wired, I suppose. You see what I do? This teaching thing, right? He nods. Maybe you'll do something like this. Maybe you'll teach. Or maybe you'll go back to building bridges and just keep it to yourself. Hard to imagine, he says. It's impossible to imagine. But you're putting the cart before the horse. The simple fact is that you are of no use to anyone else if you're in the same situation they are. Jesus, he mutters. It's the most colorful language I've ever heard him use. Here's a thought, I continue. When you're doing the writing, spiritual autolysis, do it for someone else. Write it for someone else. Express your knowledge for someone else's benefit. Write it for publication, as if the whole world will see it. Or write it as a series of letters to your son, or to an imaginary friend, or to the child you once were. Whatever. Use the process of spiritual autolysis as a means of expressing your own highest knowledge for someone else's benefit. And, of course, keep improving it until you've stated the truth. Which I'll never do? What? State the truth? Of course not.